Hello everybody, Tyler here and welcome back to another Iceberg video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the ultimate one night of Flumpty's Iceberg. This Iceberg chart in particular being created by fellow Reddit user Dolphin Boy. One Night of Flumpty's is a fascinating FNAF fangame trilogy for me. Being created by Jonachrome is a FNAF fangame trilogy that was associated with Scott Cawthon's very own Fazbear Fanverse initiative. It serves as a more silly and comedic version of the Five Nights at Freddy's formula, starring the Egg himself, Flumpty Bumpty, and his friends such as Birthday Boy Blam, Grunkfist, the Beaver, the Owl, Eyesore, the Red Man, and Golden Flumpty. This fangame series is beloved among many people in the FNAF community for its memorable characters, fun gameplay, and unique art style. I've always been a huge fan of the Flumpty's trilogy, and due to that, I feel like we're going to be getting into quite the interesting iceberg for me to cover. I'm assuming you know how iceberg charts work by now, especially if you've seen my other ones like the FNAF Fangame Iceberg, FNAF Controversy Iceberg, Day Shift at Freddy's Iceberg, and FNAF Movie Iceberg. Without further ado, let's get right into this. I'm pretty excited for this one.
Boo! You stink!
Electro Swing. Electro Swing is the electric swing song that plays in One Night of Flumpty's 3 when you reach 4 AM on Flumpty Night. This song can be seen as Flumpty congratulating the player for making it this far in the night, or maybe it can be seen as some intense music to have being playing while you're almost at the end to sort of pump you up. The song was written and composed by Jonachrome himself, and honestly, this is the best piece of music to come from the Flumpty's trilogy in my opinion. The soundtrack of this trilogy is already so damn good, but this song in particular is a huge bop. Jonachrome got inspiration to make this song from listening to the electric swing band Carvian Palace. Something interesting to note though is that during the song's break or intermission, there can be sounds heard which are very mysterious and weird. Some people have theorized that these are the screams of the game's other characters because, as you know, Flumpty killed them before the night started, so maybe it's their spirits making noises or something. Who knows? That part of the song is creepy, but otherwise this song's a banger. Exaggerated jump scare imagery. This entry is referring to how, despite the game being very silly and comical in its traditional artwork throughout, the jump scares in this game are heavily exaggerated to the top. There's actual effort to make the jump scares a little disturbing, and furthermore, some of the jump scares can look pretty gory, like ew. Ew in a really good and messed up way though, not to mention the game over screens. Oh my lord, some of these jump scares may even have meaning behind them, such as Flumpty's and One Night of Flumpty's 3, possibly representing how he's an amalgamation of horror. Truly interesting shit. Flumpty Night. Flumpty Night is the second playable night in One Night of Flumpty's 3. It's meant to serve as a big boss night against Flumpty Bumpty himself and his multiple variations of himself. The night uses a combination of the mechanics from the previous two Flumpty's games as well as using mechanics from the cancelled 1 week of Flumpty's game. Also on this night, Flumpty's friends such as Birthday Boy Blam and Grunkfist and etc., they're all dead and are killed by Flumpty at the beginning of the night simply because they failed to kill you the previous night. Just goes to show how messed up Flumpty is. Flumpty Night repeats itself at 3 AM on the game's hard boil mode as well. This night was extremely well received among players and fans for how it was a difficult and complex, but still really fun and enjoyable set of gameplay and mechanics, how much effort and detail is put into the rooms during this night, and for increasing how much of a threatening presence Flumpty is. This night is basically what made Flumpty's 3 memorable in comparison to the other two Flumpty's games, and is basically what set this one in particular apart from them. Flumpty's powers. Flumpty Bumpty is the main antagonist of the trilogy, as you guys obviously already know, but Flumpty always served as an interesting antagonist for people due to the powers he has. He obviously has the powers of being immune to the plot and transcending time and space. Essentially, he can warp reality in his own favor. His reality warping powers had led others to think Flumpty just doesn't care about anyone or anything, even death itself, thinking it's not much to worry about. Flumpty is the most powerful character in the game, being more powerful than all of the other characters combined, which basically gives his initially goofy and silly character such a menacing aura to him. Jonachrome. John O'Crum is the creator behind One Night at Flumpty's. Flumpty's isn't the only game series he's known for. He's also known for creating the Riddle School game series on Newgrounds. He also created other games that served as parodies of games like Zelda and Undertale. These games included Scary Ugly Face, Fallopian Bird, Respawn, Revive, The Button 1 and 2, Blue Block, The Exorcism of Bargo, Ocarina of Typewriter, The Estuarism of Bargo, Majora's Mask, Undercook, and Alpha Chef. Up until, John O'Crum was regarded as a developer that would always understand how to create their craft, often always having neat ideas on what to put in his games, often making developer commentaries on his work which would usually be well received by people due to how thought out they were. Unfortunately though, there's, which, spoiler alert, is its own entry in the Iceberg, which will be later on, so don't worry, we are going to talk about it, just not right now. Mobile ports. This entry is simply referring to how there are official mobile ports for the One Night at Flumpty's games. These ports were made as a part of the Fazbear Fanverse initiative. Now, unlike the PC versions, which are free, you have to buy these ports, but they only cost $1 or $2, so it isn't much to experience Flumpty Bumpty on your phone. They were ported by Click Team, which is interesting since One Night at Flumpty's was a game originally created in Game Maker, but I digress. These ports don't have much changes from the original PC versions. They're actually quite well optimized and easily playable, which is always a plus for a mobile port of a FNAF game or fan game. One Night at Flumpty's was originally a joke/parody game. This entry is simply about how Flumpty's started off as a parody game of FNAF. Flumpty's 1 being a clear parody of FNAF 1 with nearly the same mechanics and same layout. By Flumpty's 2, this series became much more original, but still somewhat parodies FNAF 2. And by FNAF 3, the series is able to stand out on its own by basically being fully original without needing to rely on other FNAF games for bases. Topped off with the parody angle is the amount of comedic and silly details within the game that makes it come across as a parody or joke game. The Fazbear Fanverse. I've already discussed what this is before numerous times, especially in the FNAF fan game Iceberg, so I'm going to be brief with this one. The Fazbear Fanverse initiative is an initiative started by Scott Cawthon to help support FNAF fan game creators with their fan games and have their fan games be recognized as official FNAF projects, while also having fan game creators get paid for their works. This also includes bringing their fan games to consoles and also providing merchandise for them. These fan games include Find It to Candies, Pop Goes, The Joy of Creation, formerly FNAF Plus, and formerly One Night at Flumpty's. Yeah, formerly. Again, that'll be touched on way later. However, while it was still in the fanverse, One Night at Flumpty's was the first FNAF fan game series in the fanverse to have new content put out for it, that being One Night at Flumpty's 3. The Egg Collection was also being worked on, which was a console bundle of the whole trilogy. However, the status on if it was cancelled or not is unknown right now. The Fazbear Fanverse in current day is seen as a mixed bag. People still like and respect the initiative due to some of the cool fan games and projects coming from it. But there are still people who bat an eye at it for the notable amount of controversies that took place involving some of the Fanverse's own developers, and unfortunately, one of them would also include Flumpty's creator, John O'Crum. The first FNAF fan game to be portrayed for traditional artwork. Now, I don't know if One Night at Flumpty's was the first FNAF fan game ever to be portrayed for traditional artwork, but it was definitely the first FNAF fan game portrayed for traditional artwork that got popular. I think that's simply due to how admittedly well drawn the visuals are and how creative it all looks. Some even argue it might even be more impressive than the typical 3D visuals most FNAF fan games have. However, that's up for you to decide. There's just also the other aspects of the game, like gameplay holding it together too. All around, it makes sense why this fan game got popular, even with its traditional artwork style. The original trilogy. This entry is most likely referring to how John O'Crum has stated on numerous occasions that the original FNAF game trilogy, FNAF 1 to 3, are his favorite FNAF games, and they served as the main inspirations behind the gameplay and mechanics and beats of the Flumpty's trilogy. Jono always thought that the cameras you would use in FNAF 1 to 3 were the most important mechanic of the games, and thought that's what made the original 3 FNAF games so compelling, which is why when FNAF 4, a game that has no cameras, released, Jono was rather disappointed. Jono always liked the bookend and finale-esque feelings FNAF 3 ended off the trilogy with, which is what would give Jono the idea on how to end the Flumpty's trilogy the way he did. He wanted to recapture that beautiful magic that was the end of the original FNAF trilogy, and to his credit, he pulled it off and will remain that way basically for a long time. 6 a.m. jokes. This entry is simply referring to how every night in Flumpty's basically ends with a word joke in the typical 6 a.m. screen. Basically, instead of 6 a.m., it ends with a word that ends with a.m. Both nights in Flumpty's 1 end with ham, both nights in Flumpty's 2 end with spam, and Flumpty night in Flumpty's 3 ends with salami. Normal night in Flumpty's 3 almost ends with 6 a.m., but it doesn't fully make it to it, and then hard-boiled mode in Flumpty's 3 does properly end with 6 a.m. These jokes may relate to Flumpty's ability to transcend time and space, but that's a whole other can of worms. Birthday Boy Blam and Flumpty are best friends. This entry is referring to the popular headcanon that Flumpty Bumpty and Birthday Boy Blam are best friends. In canon, they seem to be just friends, or at least Blam is assisting Flumpty in whatever murderous deeds he wants him to perform, but Flumpty kills him anyway right before Flumpty night, so yeah, best friends, am I right? They're typically seen together in fan media like fan art and stuff like that. Some people even go as far as to ship them, but that is something you can look on your own time. Birthday Boy Blam is the fan favorite. This entry is most likely referring to how when it comes to fans of One Night at Flumpty's, Birthday Boy Blam is usually seen as the fan favorite character. He's the character most loved by the people from what it seems. The other characters from Flumpty's usually tend to get love and appreciation in their own fans too, but it's funny how Blam seems to be the one to get the most of it. Comedy horror theming. This entry is referring to how Flumpty's is basically comedy horror. It's an extremely comedic fan game with a lot leaning on the parody angle, but the trilogy also shows its horror elements from time to time, like we discussed with the rather exaggerated jump scares. This theming honestly makes Flumpty's stand out in a really unique way from other fan games that tend to either go for just horror or even go for just comedy. Developer commentaries. This entry is simply referring to how for each game in the trilogy, there's a developer commentary uploaded on YouTube by Jonochrome for it, and these developer commentaries basically are Jonochrome getting into the fine details on how each game was created. These developer commentaries are usually seen as pretty thoughtful and in-depth, which is why everyone loves them a lot. Hell, these videos often come with some trivia about the Flumpty's games, which is great since it comes from Jono himself. These would have also been inspirational for those wanting to get into game development, especially fan games. These videos basically show how much effort and thought Jono puts into the craft with these games, which is pretty damn neat. Flumpty is a chaos god of death. This entry is probably just referring to how truly evil Flumpty is, especially when he's using his powers. When he kills his friends right before Flumpty night, it just shows how much of a truly despicable person the funny Eggman is, and some could say he's a chaos of death god for that. Could also be referring to how powerful he is, at least in comparison to other characters around him, which also works, I guess. Golden Flumpty is Flumpty's dark/evil side. This is a theory on how Golden Flumpty is basically Flumpty's dark side. Simple as that. This is evident in the scrap plans for the cancelled 1 week of Flumpty's, where it was going to be revealed that Golden Flumpty was the main antagonist of the whole series and would have been revealed to be Flumpty's alter ego. This is a theory some people believe in, which is pretty cool, but I feel like it might be dead in the water, considering most of the evidence for it lies in a dead and cancelled fan game. Oh well. 1 week at Flumpty's. 1 week at Flumpty's was going to be the third and final game in the Flumpty's trilogy, originally set to release around 2015 to 2016. However, the game was sadly cancelled. Each night in this game would have starred its own character separate from others, and there was going to be actual lore within this game, which was unlike the previous 2 games. There also would have been twist after twist, especially with Night 6, which I'll get into later on the Iceberg. This game would have obviously been on par with how long a FNAF game typically is, having 6 nights, therefore almost a week. Unfortunately though, like I stated, the game was cancelled by Jono himself. A lot of the graphics were finished and Birthday Boy Blam for Night 1 was coded and programmed in completely. The reason for the game's cancellation was motivational loss and the stress behind making it due to not enjoying making it, which was heavily understandable. The title of the game would have ended up being reused for Flumpty animations made by Jono himself as April Fool's jokes and would jokingly call this canon. The game was made due to the hype around the time for FNAF 4, which some say that's what doomed it at the start. Whatever the case, while the game is long cancelled, there are still assets and code left that were released for anyone's viewing pleasure, and there's fan-made recreations that are said to be pretty enjoyable. This game is considered one of the most popular cancelled FNAF fan games among the community, and it's not hard to see why. Pop culture references. There's a lot of pop culture references to be found in the original versions of Flumpty's 1 and 2 before the fanverse. Obviously, because of how the fanverse doesn't allow copyrighted material, all these references had to be removed and replaced in the fanverse official versions of the games. However, these pop culture references are pretty damn cool. In the first game, there's a Ronald McDonald poster, a poster of Donkey Kong, Diddy Kong, and Cranky Kong, a Donkey Kong plush, Dr. Mario's decapitated head, a Winnie the Pooh plushie that has his insides completely ripped out, a reference to Kingdom Hearts with the golden key, a Pixar ball, a Gatorade bottle, and Metroid's wallpaper, and on the newspaper the beaver is reading on the toilet, Markiplier's logo can be seen. In Flumpty's 2, there's a can of Coke, a frame that shows Pac-Man and Blinky the Ghost, a bottle of Coca-Cola, a dissected piglet hung up on the wall which can occasionally stare at you during gameplay, a cup from Wendy's that has pink liquid coming out from it, Cam 7 has Luigi from Five Nights at Wario's, and the best one of all, a Freddy Fazbear head mounted on the wall which does the nose honk from the FNAF games upon clicking on it. A lot of these are pretty damn cool, and it's a shame that they all had to pretty much be replaced. The Beaver and Owl's Deaths and Fate. This entry is obviously referring to the deaths of both Beaver and Owl. The Beaver would die from falling in the toilet, and he would also be buried by Flumpty. Some have theorized that Flumpty pushed him in. The Owl would die from choking on a urinal, presumably the exact same one he locates himself in the second game. However, that's not the actual end for these two. Their true fate is that Flumpty revives both of them and merges them together into the Beaval for the third game. However, even in this form, they die yet again, but by the hands of Flumpty prior to Flumpty Night. Fun fact, Jono realized that the Bow would have been a better name for the new Flumpty's 3 character, but he went with the Beaval because it sounded stupider. Furthermore, the Beaval only exists because Jono couldn't figure out individual mechanics for each the Beaver and the Owl, so yeah. Originally, these two were going to be revived separately. Interesting shit. The eyesore in the first game. This entry is referring to how in Cam 5 of the first game, there's a pit of 30 eyes. This is meant to be eyesore, and he serves more to be as an environmental mechanic. He wouldn't be made into an actual character until the second game, which only happened because of the speculation that came from his appearance in the first game. In the first game, he would only be referred to as the eye pit. And when I mentioned environmental mechanic, basically the amount of eyes that are left in the pit are the amount of camera flips you have left until Grunfist attacks you. And they obviously start counting down as he becomes active. It's really interesting that this initial environmental detail became a full-on fucking character. That's actually pretty damn neat. The eyesore's origin. The origins of the eyesore is that he's basically a dinosaur mutilated creature created by Flumpty. This formed creature uses the bodies of Flumpty's past victims, explaining the multiple heads. What a messed up and dark origin for a character, holy shit. The Red Man's origin. The origins of the Red Man basically come down to the fact he was a human citizen of New Dork and essentially drank lava and kinda lived, but now takes the form of a skeleton? The Red Man has always stuck out to me as being an interesting character because he's such an oddity in comparison to everyone else. Even Jono said something like this before too in the first developer commentary for the game. Easter eggs. There's a various amount of Easter eggs across the Flumpty's games, some of them being pop culture references, which we've already discussed in the last layer, but there's still plenty of non-pop culture reference Easter eggs. In Flumpty Night, there's a lot of references and callbacks to the first 2 Flumpty's games. There's even the lasers, which are a callback to 1 week of Flumpty's. Point is, there's just so much references and Easter eggs to various amount of stuff, and it's pretty damn fucking cool in all honesty. Flumpty's death. This entry could be referring to 2 different things. First thing is how when you beat Hardboiled mode in Flumpty's 3, the final night ever in the trilogy, it ends with Flumpty basically ascending into a bright light, and apparently during that, Flumpty dies. It's debatable on whether or not this is Flumpty's true death and if he actually died here. There's the association with the bright light and the fact he says,
"I'll miss you."
which could imply he's dead, but he could also just be leaving and heading off elsewhere. After all, he can transcend time and space, and regardless if this is his death or not, this ending is still extremely satisfying and beautiful for all the right reasons, and will always be the true definitive end to One Night at Flumpty's and Flumpty himself as a character. The second thing this entry could be referring to, though, is this image of Flumpty dying from a fall, apparently parodying Humpty Dumpty, and this was made because of Jono's feelings towards the Flumpty series at the time, wanting to not be known for it. Interesting, isn't it? Grunkfist's music box. This entry is referring to how in Flumpty's 2, Grunkfist was going to have the puppets mechanic, that being a music box mechanic. However, by this time, even in 2015, the music box mechanic was becoming unoriginal and overused in many fan games, so much so to a point where Jono got tired of the mechanic and admitted to disliking it. Therefore, Jono replaced the music box mechanic Grunkfist had in Flumpty's 2 with the patience meter, which, as we all know, made it into the final product. Honestly, I'm glad Jono decided to take Grunkfist's mechanic in an original direction in Flumpty's 2, simply thanks to him realizing how overused the music box mechanic is. And oh my god, this was back in 2015. In 2024, that mechanic is even more overused now than back then. Holy shit. Juliano. Juliano is a fan-made character from the Flumpty's fan game One Night at Flumpty's 4 fan-made. Nothing's really known about this character, which is pretty disappointing. Oh well. Kevin Jr. Kevin Jr. is a character that appears exclusively in the comics. He's an antagonist that collects hats, and he's also Birthday Boy Blam's main enemy, as he's a future version of Blam. Yep, he's also an enemy of Flumpty Bumpty's 2, which resulted in his death. Kevin Jr. basically wears a top hat, a monocle, a bow tie, and suspenders. Kevin Jr. technically lives on in the Flumpty's games as in all 3 games. Blam takes his form in the camera right before he's at the office. Pretty cool, huh? Mythiclear. Mythiclear is a YouTuber who has made a notable amount of fan-made Flumpty's content in the form of videos. Of course, Flumpty's isn't the only thing they post about, like Mario for example, but they've made a decent amount of videos related to this silly little egg. Some of these videos are pretty interesting to say the least. However, they move channels and basically move fandoms. They currently upload on Exalium 3 Keys and now post primarily Thomas content. Whatever the case, their Flumpty's content apparently was notable to some people, and I can honestly see why. This entry is referring to the amount of fan games there are for the Flumpty's series. Usually these fan games tend to be fan-made recreations of the cancelled 1 week of Flumpty's. Usually these can be pretty damn cool and can be found on GameJolt along with the official Flumpty's games if you want to check them all out for yourself. These fan games tend to have the charm Flumpty's has, which is pretty neat. Serialized / edgy fan art. This entry is simply referring to the amount of rather, edgy and intense fan art created for / about the series and its characters. Fun, am I right? There's of course the really good fan art with some even looking like actual renders for the games, which have gotten people confused before on what's official or not, but then there's, you know, the obvious. Need I say more? The Blind Monster. The Blind Monster is quite the interesting scrapped character. He was going to appear in Flumpty's 2, and his mechanic would have been that he would have made his way from Cam 1 to your office. And then when he made it there, you had to make absolutely no noise, which would have deterred him. Why? Well, his eyes are stitched together and he can't see, hence the Blind Monster. He can only figure things out through hearing and listening. The reason why this character was scrapped was because he would have slowed down the gameplay. Now, this character was actually reconsidered to be in Flumpty's 3. However, there was apparently no place to put him in the game, so yet again he got scrapped. It's such a shame because out of the scrapped content from across all the Flumpty's games, this guy was the most interesting one to me. First off, his design would have been so cool to see probably. Secondly, his mechanic would have been interesting. Oh well. The characters are not animatronics. Yeah. The characters are in fact not animatronics. They're literally animals, humans, literal fucking food, or literally just things. This is good though, because it's a unique switch up from the typical animatronic characters in other FNAF media and projects, but yeah, the characters in Flumpty's are not animatronics. The Flumpty Jam. Flumpty's Jam is a fan song created for One Night of Flumpty's. It was composed and released in 2015 by indie music artist DA Games, led by Will Ryan. This is a fan song that basically showcases the roots of the Flumpty's games, and is honestly such a banger.
This is the Groomer Groove. Yes, this is the Groomer Groove.
Oh my god, that's not the right song. Regardless though, this is a fan song liked by a lot of Flumpty's fans, and it makes sense considering how much love for the series is put into the song. What even is Flumpty's building? This entry is possibly referring to how apparently on the first game's developer commentary, the setting of the game was nicknamed by John McCrum as Flumpty's House of Horrors. That name would seem accurate, as it's basically a house full of horrors. The setting throughout the games might be used for pure experimentation or tests conducted by Flumpty to test people's survival or whatnot. Also, does it take place in New York City, where the player is supposedly from? Wherever the case, the setting of the Flumpty's games is quite a big mystery. Champ and Chump. These two characters were going to be antagonists in the cancelled 1 week of Flumpty's. These two, along with Iceberg, would have been the antagonists of Night 4. Now, the lore with these two is actually pretty interesting. There was going to be a plot twist in 1 week of Flumpty's that revealed that Champ was the protagonist of the first two Flumpty's games, and Chump was the best friend of said protagonist. Flumpty would lead the protagonist that became Champ into a room and try to get him to kill his best friend who would become Chump. However, the protagonist refused, so Flumpty kills both of them, and they would end up becoming Champ and Chump respectively. All of which would have been showcased in a cutscene before Night 4. These two characters are pretty interesting in terms of what gameplay mechanics they would have had for 1 week of Flumpty's, because we don't really know anything about it. There's a theory online that's even listed on the Flumpty's fandom wiki that they would have been stunned much longer by the camera flashes due to the lack of eyelids, but would have taken a shorter amount of time to deal with in comparison to Iceberg due to there being much less eyes. These two didn't make it in Flumpty's 3 due to their characters heavily relying on the original lore set up by 1 week of Flumpty's that was no longer canon, making these two the only characters in the Flumpty's franchise to not return in Flumpty's 3. It's a shame though, because Champ and Chump honestly have cool looking designs, and it would have been interesting regardless to see them in an official Flumpty's game. Flumpty clones in the first game. Originally in the first game, Jono planned for the characters to be clones or alternate variants of Flumpty himself. Ultimately though, this was scrapped due to being too repetitive. Although this idea would later be reused and come into play in Flumpty Night of One Night of Flumpty's 3. The clones that appear in the night probably would have been the alternate clones that would have showed up in the first Flumpty's. Flumpty in the One Night of Flumpty's 3 trailer. This entry is referring to how Flumpty himself can be seen on Cam 1 in Flumpty's 3 normal night during the Flumpty's 3 release trailer. Obviously this is strange and odd, as Flumpty does not appear in normal night besides talking on the phone at the start of the night, and that he physically does not appear until Flumpty Night. From what I can assume, this was done just so Flumpty Night was a surprise upon release. Similar to how in the FNAF 1 trailer, Foxy was kept a surprise for release by having Bonnie be the one running in the hallway in the trailer. That's pretty damn cool, I gotta say. Lack of ambitious lore. This entry is basically referring to how this fan game trilogy essentially lacks real lore. There was an attempt made in 1 week of Flumpty's, but that game ended up getting cancelled and the lore ended up being no longer considered canon. The resemblance of lore in Flumpty's is the quick backstory / origins of certain characters, whether comedic or not, as well as the fact that Jono stated in the Flumpty's 3 developer commentary that each night you play within the Flumpty's trilogy equates to a week of Flumpty's. 2 nights in the first game, 2 nights in the second game, and 3 nights in the third game, all adding up to 7 nights, which is a week. Also noted that for every night except Hard Boiled in Flumpty's 3, it never properly reaches 6 AM, and when it does reach 6 AM, that's when you apparently get let go by Flumpty and free back into the nice and peaceful world, and Flumpty either dies or leaves. That is basically the only real lore Flumpty's has, and a lot of it is speculatory at most. However, this game not having much serious lore makes it work in its favor, because this fan game trilogy is overall meant to be silly and goofy and fun after all. One of Flumpty's 2 rare screens. This entry is referring to how, similar to the early official FNAF games, you can encounter rare screens while playing one of Flumpty's 2. There's 3 in total. One has Flumpty giving the thumbs up with a smile while standing right next to the tombstone of the beaver, which reads, "Rip the beaver, fell in the toilet." The second one shows Flumpty running with a gun, which reads, "Bang bang, y'all." And the third and final one shows Birthday Boy Blam with wavy arms and a rather hilarious facial expression. Unlike the FNAF rare screens, which serves to be creepy, these serve to be just comedic, which is really fitting for Flumpty's. The Birthday Boy Blam comics. This entry is basically referring to the comics that Jonathan made that came up before One Night of Flumpty's. These comics would be the true origins of Flumpty Bumpty, Birthday Boy Blam, and Kevin Jr. These comics were mostly centered around Birthday Boy Blam though, especially with aspects like his rivalry with Kevin Jr. A lot of the comics in current day are lost media, but there are some that still remain, and honestly, these comics are pretty quaint. The magnitude of Flumpty's abilities. This entry is probably yet again just referring to how powerful and strong Flumpty is, which we've basically already discussed. He can transcend time and space, and due to that, he might be able to scale through infinite timelines. Same old, same old. Toy counterparts. This entry seems to be referring to existing toy counterpart versions of Flumpty in the game, basically the equivalent to the FNAF 2 toy animatronics, which are definitely fan-made, as this entry is categorized as fanon on the Iceberg chart itself, but I can't seem to find anything online about them either. Maybe it's referring to literal toys and merchandise made of the Flumpty's characters that are unofficial, but I doubt it. Mummy Beaver. The Mummy Beaver was a character that would have appeared in the cancelled 1 week of Flumpty's. He was going to be the beaver, but brought back from the dead in the form of a mummy. It's unknown what his mechanics would have entailed, but there's a toilet in Camp 4, so maybe, just maybe, that would have been his starting position, and possibly would have had a similar mechanic from the first Flumpty's game. It's also funny that his mummy-like self was formed by toilet paper. Nice. Night 6. This entry is referring to what would have been the 6th night in the cancelled 1 week of Flumpty's. Instead of actual gameplay though, it would have been an unlockable cutscene that revealed that the player was Flumpty all along, and that Golden Flumpty was behind it all, also being an alter ego of Flumpty, all revealed via looking in the mirror. There would have been an ending to this cutscene, but multiple of them were thought of. One would have been Flumpty flying off and forgetting his problems, another would have been getting rid of his immunity powers and letting everyone he hurt get revenge on him, resulting in his death, which would have shown egg yolk on the ground. And the third possible ending, which would have been a battle between Flumpty and Golden Flumpty, an alter ego battle at that. Again, it's a shame 1 week of Flumpty's got cancelled, because I would have loved to see Night 6 most of all, just for the interesting twist as well as everything else that would have gone on in it. One of Flumpty's 2 April Fool's Edition. This entry is basically referring to an April Fool's game released by Jono in 2015 to troll people with Flumpty's 2. This game basically has you inside a poorly drawn office, and whenever Flumpty, Blam, or Grunkfist enter it, you must shoot and kill them. You obviously win the night as it's impossible to lose, and yeah, that's the game. It's a silly April Fool's game and honestly just highlights the comedic edge Flumpty's has. Pumpty. Pumpty is an extremely minor character that appears in every game of the trilogy. He's a cute little pumpkin character. In Flumpty's 1, he's located in Camp 4, in Flumpty's 2, he's located in Camp 6, and in Flumpty's 3, he's located in the office of Flumpty Knight. Riddle Transfer 2 and one of Flumpty's 3 parallels. There are multiple parallels that can be found between Jono's two games, Flumpty's 3 and Riddle Transfer 2, one of which being Yeti appearing in Flumpty's 3 as an Easter egg cameo. There's also the biggest one of all, that their histories are similar when it comes to cancellations in their developments, with how Jono would be overambitious with this project and then cancel it but then try it at it again, and it actually releases. It's very interesting how these both are similar when it comes to their stories and how they were made. The beaver would have played rap music. This entry is referring to how initially, when the beaver left Camp 6 and ran down the hall in the first game, rap music was going to play. This was ultimately scrapped as it would be too easy for the player to know when the beaver was coming. That would have been interesting if it made it in though. The red man is a himbo. This is labeled as a joke entry on the Iceberg chart itself, but honestly, I kinda see it, not gonna lie. The red man being a himbo works and is fitting. Yolk face. This entry is basically referring to Yolkface, who's quite literally a popular fan-made Flumpty's character. He's never appeared in official Flumpty's media, but he's had a prominent appearance in fan-made Flumpty's content, mostly fan games of Flumpty's, one in particular being One Night of Flumpty's 4 fan-made. I think what makes this character resonate with some people is just how it seems like this type of character would work really well in the official Flumpty's universe. All in all, this guy serves to be a particularly interesting character. Flumpty fears religion. This entry is another mysterious one due to the lack of validity and truth to it. The creator of the Iceberg stated in the comments of the Reddit post about the Iceberg that they claim Jono mentioned something about it while discussing Flumpty's 3 and that they heard others say Flumpty fears religion. I don't know, let me know in the comments if there's any lead to this one. Flumpty is near pure evil. This entry is probably just yet again referring to how much power Flumpty has and how much of it is used for pure evil. Flumpty is a menace and a genuine threat to behold, and yeah, that's basically the long and short of it. Jake from State Farm. This entry is referring to how originally Jono was going to have Metro Man 347, also known as Jake, to make a phone call during the middle of the night, basically saying he was Jake from State Farm, making an obvious reference. However, this was ultimately scrapped due to how it would have fucked with the tone and mood of the night. Damn, that would have been funny as fuck though. Jonochrome's love/hate relationship with the series. This entry is referring to how Jono has seemingly had a love/hate relationship with the Flumpty series. How it used to be was that Jono would love the characters of Flumpty and Blam and more and would want to use them for more projects, but he would grow tired of FNAF and its eventual formula adopted by FNAF 4, so he was getting tired of making FNAF-esque projects with the Flumpty's characters. However, this was around the time of 1 week of Flumpty's. He also wasn't a fan of how he was seen as the Flumpty's guy, being known for a fan game series, and he would rather be known as a real game developer. He even made an image of Flumpty's death, along with text complaining of how he feels about Flumpty going forward, which you can read on your own time if you pause the video. He of course would end up making Flumpty's 3, but he would still appreciate FNAF 3's ending much more than a lot of people probably do, and was still the catalyst for how Flumpty's 3 turned out. So yeah, over time, Jono would both love and hate the series, mostly because of his personal feelings towards the actual FNAF series itself and his personal image as a developer, but again, he still loved his own characters that he created, which is fair enough, honestly. Night 5 Office. This entry is basically referring to how in the cancelled 1 week of Flumpty's, the office was going to look different in Night 5 to accommodate with how it was a boss night against Flumpty himself. The office was going to look much more demented and creepy with much more darker lighting, and honestly it looked pretty damn cool. One Night of Flumpty's 3 finished development in April of 2020. This entry is referring to how the game was basically finished ever since April 2020. How come it released much later on in Halloween 2021? Jono was probably making finishing touches and polishing up the game while also waiting on the porting process of not only Flumpty's 3 but the other 2 games. Interesting. Ronald McDonald was going to be an enemy. This entry is referring to how in the original plans for Flumpty's 1, instead of Grunkfist the clown that would crawl out of the office poster to kill you, it was going to be Ronald McDonald of all characters. Yep, the same Ronald McDonald who's the mascot of the fast food chain McDonald's. As funny as this would have been, I think Jono not adding him into the game benefited him in the long run because of the fanverse, since it didn't allow copyrighted material for obvious reasons, so yeah. The beaver was going to be a human. This entry is referring to how before the beaver was the Foxy-like character in the game was going to have a red colored dude named Some Guy fill in that role. He wore a cap, t-shirt, and pants that would strangely go down to the floor. This would have been such an interesting shift from the other antagonists in the game, although this design was most likely just a sketch and would have looked different in the final product, I'm sure. Flumpty Bumpty meets Steven Universe. This entry is essentially referring to a pretty short webcomic basically revolving around Flumpty meeting Steven Universe. This webcomic was not official by Jono and is basically fan content. However, this comic is now lost to time as only one panel of it is still viewable and can be found. I don't know why this is an entry on the Iceberg, but the fact it's basically a lost webcomic honestly makes this much more interesting than it needed to be. Flumpty killed the toy counterparts. Yeah, still don't know what the toy counterparts of Flumpty's is all about, especially since there seems to be some lore implication with Flumpty killing them now. Dear lord. Next one. Jonochrome's temporary one night of Flumpty's purge. This entry is probably referring to how for the longest time for several years, Jono would just actively not be involved with the Flumpty series, which is something we already touched on in this Iceberg. But I don't know. It could be referring to something else, but in the meantime, yeah, not sure about this one. One day of Flumpty's characters in Ultra Custom Night. Ultra Custom Night is a fan game of Ultimate Custom Night, which basically heavily extends the cast of customizable characters across official FNAF games and media. This roster also includes the fanverse, which basically used to include the One Night of Flumpty's cast. These characters were Flumpty, Grunkfist, Golden Flumpty, Empty Bempty, and the Owl. However, due to the controversies with Jonochrome, the Flumpty's characters were removed from the game. Some of the mechanics of the characters ended up being given to other characters. This also included the exposure meter being changed to the panic meter. That's quite a damn shame. Flumpty surpassed his inner demons. This entry is probably just referring more to how powerful Flumpty is again, same song and dance, blah blah blah. Next one. At least this one has a picture to go along with it. Flumpty's location is part of the backrooms. While I don't think this is necessarily true, it would be kind of fitting for Flumpty's House of Horrors to be a backrooms-esque location. Probably can make way for some liminal space images, I don't know. Jacob Navin III. Now, this entry is actually something that has stuff to talk about. Unfortunately, though, this is going to get really fucked up and awful, so yeah. Trigger warning for sensitive and serious subjects, by the way. Jacob Navin III is an individual who was in the Flumpty's community who was one of the people working on a fan-made revival project for the cancelled 1 Week of Flumpty's. Although there were people who respected him, he had some people that would make fun of him and his work. However, any respect people had for him would be gone as first things first, Jacob, 18, sent pictures of his penis, pictures of cum on his phone screen, and his porn folder all to a 13-year-old child in Discord DMs. He also drew porn of a teenage girl from real life and attempted to play it off as just a harmless joke. He would also suicide bait to people as well. He would also play victim to everything despite there being proof he did what he did. Regardless, he also kept trying to justify his actions. He also pretty much had sex with his own damn sister, which is incest obviously. Later on, when he was in his 20s, there was a 13-year-old girl who developed a crush on Jacob, which is normal normal for younger people to develop crushes on people they idolize, but Jacob would enable it. When this girl had personal issues going on in her life involving family, and she needed someone to talk to, nobody, not even Jacob, would help her. He would tell her he would adopt her when given the chance and would say all this gross and disgusting stuff in relation to her. This person is disgusting and despicable and shouldn't be on the internet, especially around children. Even in the One Night at Flumpty's community, there's bad apples. One movie at Flumpty's. This entry seems to be referring to a film adaptation for Flumpty's. Obviously would be fan-made, as there would have to be serious approval for an actual film to be made. However, I can't find anything on this. There's fan videos on YouTube that are titled as movies that get into stuff like Flumpty's backstory, but I don't know. If you know anything about this entry, please inform me in the comments. One Night at Aming's. So this entry is referring to this fan game series created by someone who's clearly a kid or someone who's new to game development, and yeah, it can be found on Game Jolt. I don't see what the relation this has to Flumpty's besides the one night part of it. Let me know what the significance this would have to Flumpty's besides the title if anyone can figure it out, because I genuinely do not know why this is on Flumpty's Iceberg. The Jonachrome incident. The final entry of this iceberg, and honestly, I don't know why this is at the very bottom of the iceberg. For me, iceberg should be categorized by how known a topic is, but oh well. I've gone over what happened in detail before in the FNAF controversy iceberg, but I'll say it again. Trigger warning for sensitive and serious subjects again, by the way. On November 8th, 2021, a twit longer was posted on the Twitter by an anonymous account accusing Jonachrome, developer of the Flumpty series, of grooming a minor, Jono being 22 and the victim being 14. A relationship with these two apparently began. Screenshots from various sources were linked with this as proof. When this twit longer was initially released, people didn't believe it and thought it was a ploy of attention because of how much recognition Flumpty's 3 was receiving, since this happened a few days after the game's release. However, the people who didn't believe it would be proven wrong, as later, Popgo's developer Kane Carter would state that the twit longer was true and Jono admitted to everything on it, and then Jonachrome himself would release a statement basically confessing to the accusations. It basically turned out it was all true. He would still try to defend himself in the statement with various statements such as how they weren't trying to be sexual in this relationship, but he also accused the person coming out about it in the first place only doing it out of spite. The victim would also later come out about it too, defending Jono for most of it, confirming that the interactions were indeed not sexual, and even claimed that Jono did apologize to her and Jono would be receiving therapy for everything. However, she would still consider what John did as grooming. Afterwards, Jono would further apologize about it and would leave the internet, saying he might return someday. Since then, there's been hints towards a possible return of the man, but that's really it. He's also been apparently getting help and seeking therapy, which some people saw as a good thing. Regardless, a lot of people were extremely disappointed in Jono for what happened. Huge respect for the man was lost, and some people stopped liking the Flumpty series because of it. However, a lot of people decided to go with the rule of separating creator and creation, and love the Flumpty series without supporting Jono, and due to that, that's why Flumpty's is still seen as one of the best FNAF fan game series of all time, and is still highly acclaimed, even after what happened with its developer. What Jono did was shitty, and there is going to be no defense made for him as a person and his actions. Grooming a minor is fucked up. I will say though that regardless, Flumpty's is always going to be seen as a titan in the FNAF fan game scene, and a lot of inspiration people got to make fan games and projects came from Flumpty's. And all of that cannot be ignored, just like how Jono's actions shouldn't obviously be ignored and should be criticized whenever the chance. I had loads of fun covering this iceberg, especially since a lot of the entries were either really silly or good fun. Sadly, we had 2 of those entries near the end which were more serious subjects, but at the end of the day, that doesn't bother me. One Night at Flumpty's to me remains as one of the best fan game trilogies out there, and the first 2 games being such nostalgic experiences, with the 3rd game being just as memorable and arguably better than the first 2. Flumpty Bumpty, despite being an egg that is immune to the plot and can transcend time and space, it may come after you, is going to forever be a memorable character among FNAF fans for years to come, and his legacy will never be forgotten. Simply put, One Night at Flumpty's is one of the best Five Nights at Freddy's fan games of all time.